Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, your heart racing, hearing a distant howl. It's not an ordinary wolf. It's something more primal, more terrifying. Something that makes your blood run cold in your veins. My name is Adam, and I'm about to share a story that has haunted me since childhood. A story that my grandfather, Robert, told in whispers on dark nights on our isolated farm in Burkittsville, Maryland. A story about a werewolf that he swore was real. My grandfather passed away 2 years ago at over 100 years old, after a long life of joys and courage, but before he left, he made me promise to tell the truth about what happened on our farm. The truth about the creature that hunted in the shadows, leaving a trail of blood and terror. Burkittsville is a place where ancient legends still have power, where the line between reality and nightmare becomes blurred. Our farm, surrounded by dense forest, was the perfect hiding place for secrets and monsters. This is not a story for the faint of heart. It is a narrative of horror, blood, and an ancestral curse. If you have the courage to face the unknown, continue. But don't say I didn't warn you. Turn off the lights, close the curtains, and prepare to immerse yourself in a world where the impossible becomes reality. This is the story of the werewolf of Thornwood Farm. This is the story of my family, and it may be the beginning of your worst nightmare. My grandfather Robert was a born storyteller. On cold winter nights, he would gather us around the fireplace and entertain us with fantastical tales that made our imaginations soar. But there was one story in particular that always intrigued me, mainly because, unlike the others, he insisted it was true. It was the story of how he, for the first time, encountered the beast that haunted our farm. Before that fateful night, my grandfather had already heard rumors about the creature. Whispers among the older workers, legends passed down from generation to generation. But for the young Robert of 23 years, they were just that, stories to scare children and entertain the superstitious, until he saw it with his own eyes. It was on a cold autumn night in 1942. The Thornwood Farm in Burkittsville, Maryland, as it was known at the time, was plunged into an unsettling silence. The trees surrounding the property looked like dark sentinels. My grandfather was sitting on the porch of the main house, his eyes scanning the darkness. The air was heavy, laden with the earthy smell that precedes a storm. But it wasn't the rain that worried him that night. In recent weeks, something strange had been happening on the farm. Animals disappeared without a trace, only to be found days later, mutilated in ways that defied logic. The workers spoke of shadows moving in the forest, of howls that did not belong to any known animal. Robert tried to remain calm, to rationalize the events. Maybe it was just a daring predator, a bear, a puma, or a wolf that had ventured too far from its usual territory. But deep down in his mind, an insistent voice told him it was something more, something beyond common understanding. That's when he heard it. A high-pitched, agonizing scream coming from the stable. Robert quickly stood up in shock, his heart pounding. Without thinking twice, he grabbed the shotgun he always kept nearby and ran towards the sound. The moon, nearly full, cast a pale light over the fields, creating eerie shadows. Robert ran, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. The scream had stopped, replaced by an even more terrifying silence. As he approached the stable, Robert smelled it before he saw anything. The odor of fresh blood mixed with something else, something wild that made all his instincts scream for him to turn around and run. But Robert was a Thornwood, and the Thornwoods did not run from danger. With trembling hands, he pushed open the stable door. The scene that greeted him would be etched in his memory forever. The floor was covered in blood-stained straw, pieces of flesh and bones scattered as if in a nightmare scenario. And in the center of it all, illuminated by the moonlight coming through a broken window, was the creature. At first glance, it looked like a monstrously large wolf. But as Robert watched, paralyzed in horror, The creature rose on its hind legs, revealing a form that was a grotesque mixture of man and beast. It was at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in a dense black coat. Its front paws ended in razor-sharp claws, still dripping with the blood of its victims. The head was a distorted, elongated version of a wolf, with fangs that seemed too big even for that monstrous mouth. But it was the creature's eyes that froze Robert's blood. They were not the eyes of an animal, but human eyes, shining with cruel intelligence and an insatiable hunger. For a moment that seemed to stretch for eternity, man and beast stared at each other. Robert could hear his own breath, rapid and shallow, the only sound in that silence. Then, with a growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the stable, the creature attacked. Robert raised the shotgun out of pure instinct, firing almost without aiming. The blast of the shot echoed through the stable, followed by the creature's howl of pain. The bullet had hit the creature, causing it to stagger back. Taking advantage of these precious seconds, Robert turned and ran. He ran as he had never run before, terror giving wings to his feet. Behind him, he could hear the sound of wood breaking, followed by the heavy impact of paws on the ground. The creature was chasing him. Robert reached the main house, practically breaking down the door in his rush to get inside. He locked it, knowing in his heart that a simple wooden door would be no obstacle for that monster. But the attack did not come. Instead, Robert heard a long howl, a sound so full of pain and fury that made his bones tremble. And then, silence. He spent the rest of the night on watch, the shotgun firmly clutched against his chest, his eyes fixed on the window. When the sun finally rose, tinging the sky a bloody red, Robert mustered the courage to go out. The stable was as he had left it, a scene of carnage that made his stomach churn. But the creature had disappeared, leaving behind only huge footprints leading towards the forest. That morning, as he cleaned up the remains of the massacre and buried what was left of the animals, Robert made an oath. He would find out what that creature was, where it had come from, and find a way to stop it. What he did not know, as he made that promise, was that he was committing himself to a search that would consume not only his life, but that of the entire family and generations of Thornwoods. A search that would lead him to discover dark secrets about the family itself and to face horrors that most people believe only exist in nightmares. The night of the first attack was just the beginning. The real nightmare was about to unfold. In the weeks following the attack in the stable, a silence fell over Thornwood Farm. The workers spoke in whispers, nervous glances constantly cast towards the dark line of the forest. Fear hung in the air like a dense fog, almost palpable. Robert, determined to protect his property and unravel the mystery of the creature, began a series of nightly vigils. Armed with his shotgun and a handful of silver bullets, a precaution he would have previously considered ridiculous, he spent hours sitting on the porch, watching the shadows. It was during one of those nights that horror presented itself to him. The moon was full, bathing the fields in a light so intense that you could see for miles. Robert was at his usual post, his watchful eyes scanning the darkness. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional hoot of a distant owl. Suddenly, a movement at the edge of the forest caught his attention. At first, it just looked like a darker shadow among the trees. But then, the shadow moved, taking shape. Robert felt his blood run cold as the creature emerged from the forest. It was even bigger than he remembered, its black coat absorbing the moonlight. Its eyes, two bright yellow orbs, scanned the landscape with disturbing intelligence. With fluid movements that defied its mass, the beast approached the fields. Robert watched, paralyzed, as it sniffed the air, its head moving from side to side. For a terrible moment, he was sure that the creature looked directly at him, a cruel grin revealing razor-sharp fangs. Then, as quietly as it had appeared, the beast disappeared into the shadows. Robert released the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely hold the shotgun. But the worst was yet to come. A high-pitched scream cut through the night, coming from the direction of the workers' houses. Robert jumped up, his heart pounding harder. He ran towards the sound, praying he wasn't too late. The scene that awaited him was one of pure horror. The door to Jim's house, his foreman, had been ripped from its hinges. Inside, the floor was covered in blood. Furniture was broken, as if a desperate struggle had taken place. And in the center of it all, illuminated by the moonlight coming through the broken window, was Jim's body, or what was left of it. Robert fell to his knees, his stomach churning. The sight was so horrific, so beyond anything he had ever experienced, that his mind struggled to process it. That's when he heard it. A low, grotesque sound coming from a dark corner of the room. Slowly, fearing what he would see, Robert raised his eyes. There, crouched in the shadows, was the creature. Its eyes gleamed with an evil satisfaction, focused entirely on Robert. Blood dripped from its jaws, staining the fur around its mouth. For a moment they stared at each other. Robert could feel the weight of that gaze, the cruel intelligence behind those eyes. This was not an irrational beast, but something more, something that perfectly understood the terror it was causing. Then, with a movement so fast that Robert could barely register it, the creature leaped through the window and disappeared into the night. The silence that followed was broken by the screams of the other workers, who had finally arrived at the scene. But Robert barely heard them. His world had been reduced to a single, terrible truth. The creature was not only real, it was actively hunting. And it seemed to have a particular interest in him. In the weeks that followed, fear spread across the farm like a disease. More attacks occurred, always on full moon nights. Animals were found mutilated in the fields, their carcasses left as macabre warnings. And occasionally, the beast ventured closer to the houses, leaving huge muddy footprints on the porches, as if it were playing with its prey. Robert found himself consumed by the need to understand, to find a way to stop the creature. He scoured old books of legends, consulted city elders, sought the help of a local priest, and even consulted with a medium of dubious reputation in the neighboring city. But the more he learned, the more questions arose. The stories spoke of ancient curses, of pacts made with dark forces. Some mentioned a cursed lineage. Others whispered about secret rituals that could break the curse, or make it worse. And amidst all this, a question persisted, haunting Robert's thoughts. Why did the creature seem so focused on him? What connected the monster to the Thornwood family? As summer gave way to autumn and another full moon approached, Robert knew he was running out of time. The beast's next hunting night was coming, and with it, the certainty of more horror and death. What Robert did not know was that this next full moon would bring not only terror, but also revelations that would forever change his understanding of his family and the nature of the evil that haunted them. The full moon hung in the sky like a watchful eye, bathing Thornwood Farm in a pale, spectral light. Robert was at his usual post on the porch, the shotgun firmly gripped in his sweaty hands. The air was heavy, laden with tension. A twig snapped in the darkness, causing Robert to start. His eyes swept the tree line, looking for any movement. For a moment, he thought he saw two luminous dots among the shadows. Eyes watching, waiting. But when he blinked, the vision had disappeared. The sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. It was young Thomas, the only worker still remaining on the farm, running towards the main house. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "Mr. Thornwood," he gasped. "In the barn, there's something—" Robert didn't wait to hear more. With his heart racing, he ran towards the barn, Thomas on his heels. As they approached, a strong smell invaded their nostrils, the unmistakable stench of fresh blood. The barn door was ajar, creaking softly in the night breeze. Robert hesitated for a moment, fear threatening to paralyze him. But then, with courage, he pushed the door open and entered. The scene that greeted him was one of pure horror. The floor was covered in pieces of what were once animals. But that's not what made Robert's blood run cold. In the center of the barn, illuminated by the moonlight coming through the cracks in the roof, was the creature. It was gigantic in Robert's eyes, its muscular body covered in dense black fur. Its eyes a bright yellow, fixed on them. "Run! Run! Run!" Logically, Robert shouted to Thomas, pushing the young man towards the door. The beast attacked with surprising speed. Robert raised his shotgun, his hands trembling violently. He fired, the roar of the shot echoing in the confined space. The bullet missed the creature, but scared it with the bang, making it hesitate for an instant. Taking advantage of the distraction, Robert and Thomas ran out of the barn. They could hear the heavy breathing of the beast behind them, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. They separated, Robert heading towards the main house while Thomas ran to the tool shed. The creature stopped for a moment, as if deciding which prey to pursue. Then, with a howl that made Robert shudder, it lunged in his direction. Robert entered the door of the house, locking it behind him. Seconds later, he heard the heavy impact of a body against the wood. The door trembled on its hinges, but held. For hours, that seemed like an eternity. Robert cowered in the dark, listening to the sounds of the beast prowling around the house, occasionally attacking the windows or the door. Gradually, the sounds faded, until finally, with the first ray of sun, silence fell. When Robert finally mustered the courage to go outside, he found the farm in ruins. Broken fences, dead animals scattered across the fields, and in the center of the yard, a trail of huge footprints leading back into the forest. Thomas emerged from the tool shed, pale and trembling, but alive. Together, they observed the destruction around them. The magnitude of what they faced had finally come to an end. At that moment, Robert understood that his life would never be the same again. The horror that haunted Thornwood Farm was real and relentless. Although he did not yet know the exact nature of the threat or its connection to his family, Robert felt the weight of a deep and disturbing mystery settling on his shoulders. The long night had ended, but the questions it raised opened the door to an even greater enigma. Robert knew that he was now involved in a battle not only for his life and his farm, but to unravel a secret that seemed to be rooted in the very land of Thornwood. And as the sun rose on the horizon, bathing the farm in a light that seemed cruel in its normality, Robert needed to discover the truth behind this creature, no matter the cost. Because now he knew what the mystery surrounding the farm was. The days following the night of terror were a whirlwind of frenetic activity. Robert and Thomas worked tirelessly to repair the damage to the farm, bury the dead animals, and reinforce the defenses. Fear hung over them like a dark cloud, each nightfall bringing the threat of a new attack. While they worked under the scorching sun, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind the attacks. The creature's eyes, the way it seemed focused on him. It wasn't the behavior of a simple wild animal. A week after the incident, with the most urgent repairs completed, Robert decided it was time to seek answers. He started in the attic of the main house, rummaging through old dusty boxes and long-forgotten trunks. It was there, buried under stacks of yellowed documents, that he found the diary of his great-grandfather, William Thornwood. The pages were fragile with age, the ink faded in some places. Robert began to read, his curiosity turning to horror as the words revealed a dark story. William wrote about a devastating drought that threatened to destroy the farm. Desperate, he sought help where he shouldn't, an old witch who lived deep in the forest. The pages described a sinister ritual, a pact sealed with blood. The witch promised prosperity for the land, but at what price? Robert closed the diary abruptly, his heart pounding. He needed fresh air, he needed to think. Going out onto the porch, he found Thomas nailing boards over the windows on the first floor. "Mr. Thornwood?" Thomas called, noticing the paleness on Robert's face. "Is everything okay?" Robert hesitated. Could he trust Thomas with what he had discovered? Before he could decide, the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the farm. "Let's finish this tomorrow," Robert said, his voice strained. "We better get inside before it gets completely dark." The two men hurried inside the house, locking doors and checking windows. Night fell on Thornwood Farm, bringing with it an eerie silence. Hours passed. Robert and Thomas remained vigilant, weapons in hand, alert to any unusual sound. It was almost midnight when they heard it, a distant scream coming from the direction of the main road. Rushing to the second-floor window, they saw a nightmare scene illuminated by the full moon. A cart was stopped on the road, its driver lying in the dust, and over him, a dark and monstrous figure. The creature raised its head, its yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. For a moment, Robert thought he saw something else in that gaze. Recognition, maybe even a spark of humanity. But then the beast howled, a sound so loud that it made them both tremble, and leaped into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. "My God," Thomas whispered, his face pale with horror. "What do we do now?" Robert knew they couldn't simply ignore what they had witnessed. "We need to check for survivors," he said, although he feared it was too late. Armed and cautious, they went down to the road. The cart driver lay motionless, his wounds clearly fatal. But to their surprise, a faint groan came from inside the cart. They found a wounded but alive man hidden under a pile of goods. As they carried him back to the farm, the man mumbled incoherently about yellow eyes in the darkness. In the relative safety of the house, they treated the survivor's injuries as best they could. When the man finally fell asleep, exhausted and feverish, Robert turned to Thomas. "There's something you need to know," he said gravely. "About Thornwood Farm. About our history." Sitting at the kitchen table, William's diary opened between them. Robert told Thomas what he had discovered. The pact with the witch, the promise of prosperity, the terrible price that had to be paid. "But this is crazy," Thomas exclaimed. "Curses, witches. This can't be real." Robert looked out the window at the fields stretching out under the moonlight, fields that remained green and fertile, no matter how bad the conditions. "Look around you, Thomas," he said softly. "Our land has always prospered, no matter how bad the conditions were. And now this creature. I can't ignore the possibility that it's all connected." Thomas was silent, digesting Robert's words. Finally, he spoke. "What are we going to do now?" Robert looked into the dark forest, where the creature had disappeared. "We need to find out more," he said with determination. "About the curse, about the witch, and we need to find a way to end it once and for all." As the night wore on, a plan began to form. They would need to travel, seek knowledge in dark places, maybe even find the witch if she still lived. Robert knew the path ahead would be dangerous. But looking at Thomas, seeing the determination in his eyes, he felt a spark of hope. Together, perhaps they could unravel the mystery of the creature, break the curse that haunted Thornwood Farm. But as they made their plans, neither of the two men noticed the shadow passing by the window, or the yellow eyes watching them from the darkness. The wind howled like a ghostly lament over Thornwood Farm, with relentless fury. Robert, his face etched with worry, watched the storm through the fogged-up window. The previous night had brought more than just terror. It had brought a grim certainty that the curse that hung over his family was real and intensifying. The attack on the cart, the wounded man muttering about yellow eyes and an ancient curse. It all fit together in a macabre puzzle that he needed to solve. "We need to go," Robert said, turning to Thomas, who was adjusting a hunting rifle. We can't stay here waiting for the creature to attack us again. We need to find answers, figure out how to break this curse." Thomas nodded, his face pale but determined. "Where are we going, Mr. Thornwood?" "To the city of Frederick," Robert replied, with a firm tone of voice. "There lives the librarian, Mrs. Abigail. She is an old lady and has access to old books and forgotten documents. If anyone knows anything about the Thornwood curse, it's her." The journey to Frederick was arduous, with muddy roads and the constant feeling of being watched. Robert felt a weight on his chest, a mixture of fear and determination. He knew they were venturing into unknown territory, where the dangers were both physical and supernatural. As they arrived in Frederick, the city seemed deserted, with dark and silent houses. The municipal library stood in the center of the square, like a guardian of long-forgotten secrets. Mrs. Abigail, an elderly woman with white hair and penetrating eyes, greeted Robert and Thomas with a gentle smile. "Robert, my dear, how long it's been. What brings you to my humble library?" Robert explained the situation, telling about the creature's attacks, his great-grandfather's diary, and the curse that haunted his family. Mrs. Abigail listened carefully, her face becoming increasingly somber. "I feared this day would come," she said with a sigh. "The Thornwood curse is an old story, a dark stain on your lineage. Long ago, one of your ancestors made a pact with dark forces in exchange for wealth and power, but the price was high." Mrs. Abigail led Robert and Thomas to a secluded section of the library, where dusty shelves housed ancient books and fragile manuscripts. She pulled out a book bound in black leather, with yellowed pages and Gothic lettering. "This is the Book of Lilith, a forbidden book that contains dark secrets and dangerous rituals," she said in a grave tone of voice. "Here, we may find a way to break the curse, but I warn you, the knowledge contained in these pages is dangerous and can have terrible consequences." Robert and Thomas spent hours poring over the book, translating the archaic words and deciphering the mysterious symbols. They discovered that the curse could only be broken through a complex ritual that required a blood sacrifice and the invocation of ancestral forces. "The ritual is dangerous, Mr. Thornwood," Thomas warned, his voice trembling. "We can't be sure it will work, and the consequences may be worse than the curse itself." Robert hesitated. He knew they were on the edge of an abyss, where the line between salvation and perdition was thin, but he saw no other choice. The creature would continue to hunt, to terrorize his family, and to stain his lineage with blood. He needed to risk everything to end the curse once and for all. "Let's do the ritual," Robert said with grim determination. "But we need to prepare. We need to find the ingredients, learn the words, and protect ourselves against the forces we will invoke." Mrs. Abigail agreed to help them, guiding them through the secrets of the Book of Lilith and providing the necessary materials for the ritual. She warned them of the dangers they would face, the pitfalls they might encounter, and the sacrifices they would have to make. Returning to the farm, and as they prepared for the ritual, Robert and Thomas felt the creature's presence drawing closer. Distant howls echoed through the night. Huge footprints were found in the surroundings of the city, and the smell of blood hung in the air like a harbinger of death. Robert knew time was running out. The night of the ritual was approaching, and with it, the moment of truth. They were ready to face the creature, to challenge the curse, and to fight for the future of Thornwood Farm. But deep down in his heart, Robert feared that the price of salvation would be higher than they could pay. The full moon, now a silver blade in the night sky, illuminated the clearing in the forest, the chosen location for the ritual. Robert, his face tense, watched Thomas as he drew the arcane symbols on the ground with white chalk. Mrs. Abigail, cloaked in a dark robe, murmured ancient words in a grave tone, preparing the makeshift altar with herbs and candles. The air was charged, with the feeling that invisible forces were stirring around them. Robert felt chills, a mixture of fear and excitement. He knew they were about to challenge something powerful, something that could destroy them in an instant. "Almost ready, Mr. Thornwood," Thomas said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just a few more details and we can start." Robert nodded, taking a deep breath to calm his nerves. He was holding firmly a ceremonial dagger that would be used for the blood sacrifice. The cold blade in his hand was a constant reminder of the price they might have to pay to break the curse. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the darkness, breaking the tense silence. Robert raised his head, his senses on high alert. He could feel the creature's presence approaching, like a hungry predator sniffing out its prey. "She's coming," Robert said, his voice tight. "We need to hurry." Mrs. Abigail quickened the pace of her prayers, while Thomas finished drawing the symbols on the ground. Robert positioned himself in the center of the clearing, the dagger in his hand, ready to face whatever came. A monstrous growl echoed through the forest, followed by the sound of breaking branches and trampled leaves. The creature emerged from the shadows, its yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. A huge creature, monstrously larger than Robert could remember, claws sharp as razors. "Thornwood," snarled the creature in a hoarse voice, "you cannot escape your destiny. The blood of the curse runs in your veins, and you belong to me." Robert ignored the creature's words, focusing on the ritual. He raised the dagger above his head, taking a deep breath to calm his nerves. "Now, Thomas," Robert shouted. Thomas lit the candles on the altar, illuminating the clearing with a dim and flickering light. Mrs. Abigail began to chant in an ancient language, her voice echoing through the forest. Robert lowered the dagger, ready to make the blood sacrifice. But before he could act, the creature attacked, leaping towards him with surprising speed. Robert narrowly dodged, feeling the creature's claws graze his arm. He staggered back, losing his balance. The creature lunged at him again, ready to kill him. But before it could reach him, Thomas threw a handful of blessed salt into the creature's eyes. It howled in pain, staggering back, giving Robert a chance to get up. "Continue with the ritual," Robert shouted to Thomas and Mrs. Abigail. "I'll distract him." Robert faced the creature, swinging the dagger like a weapon. He knew he had no chance of defeating it in a direct fight, but he needed to buy time for the ritual to be completed. The creature attacked with fury, its claws and fangs seeking Robert's flesh. He dodged and blocked the blows, using his agility and knowledge of the terrain to avoid being caught. The fight was brutal and relentless. Robert was thrown against trees, scratched and bitten, but he refused to yield. He knew the future of his family depended on him. Meanwhile, Thomas and Mrs. Abigail continued with the ritual, their voices rising and the power growing. The symbols on the ground began to glow, and an intense energy emanated from the altar. Finally, when Robert was on the verge of collapse, the ritual was completed. A blinding light exploded from the altar, enveloping the clearing in a supernatural glow. The creature howled in terror, recoiling into the shadows. It tried to escape, but was prevented by an invisible barrier that trapped it in the clearing. "Now, Robert!" Mrs. Abigail shouted. "It's your chance! Use the dagger to break the curse!" Robert raised the dagger above his head, gathering all his strength and determination. He shouted ancient words, invoking the power of the ancestors to help him. Then, with a sure blow, he plunged the dagger into the creature's heart. An agonizing scream echoed through the forest, followed by a sepulchral silence. The blinding light diminished, revealing the creature fallen to the ground, its body turning to dust. The curse had been broken. The sun was rising on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Robert, exhausted and wounded, but with a smile of relief on his face, watched the clearing in the forest. The creature had been defeated, the curse broken, and Thornwood Farm was finally free from the shadow of terror. Thomas and Mrs. Abigail approached Robert, their faces reflecting the same mixture of relief and weariness. They had faced evil and survived, united by courage and determination. "We did it, Mr. Thornwood," Thomas said, his voice choked with emotion. "We ended it once and for all." Robert nodded, placing his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Yes, Thomas, we did. But we couldn't have done it without you. Your bravery and loyalty were essential to our victory." Mrs. Abigail smiled gently, placing her hand on Robert's arm. "You honored your ancestors, Robert. You proved that the blood of courage and kindness is stronger than the blood of the curse." Robert looked out at the forest, feeling the peace and tranquility that had long abandoned Thornwood Farm. He knew the journey had been long and painful, but the result was worth every sacrifice. "There is still much work to be done," Robert said with a sigh. "We need to rebuild the farm, heal the wounds, and move forward. But now we can do it with the certainty that we are free from terror." In the days that followed, Robert, Thomas, and Mrs. Abigail worked together to restore Thornwood Farm. They repaired the fences, planted new crops, and cared for the animals. The local community, inspired by Robert's courage, offered help and support, joining together to rebuild what had been lost. Thornwood Farm thrived again, becoming a symbol of hope and resilience. Robert became a respected leader, known for his wisdom, his kindness, and his determination to protect his community. Mrs. Abigail returned to her library in Frederick, taking with her the Book of Lilith and the promise to keep its secrets forever. She continued to be a source of knowledge and guidance for Robert, helping him to understand his family's history and to make wise decisions for the future. Thomas remained by Robert's side, becoming his friend and confidant. He married a young woman from the community and built a family on Thornwood Farm, perpetuating the legacy of courage and loyalty. And so, the story of the Thornwood curse came to an end. The creature was defeated, the curse broken, and Thornwood Farm was reborn from the ashes of terror. Robert, Thomas, and Mrs. Abigail became heroes, remembered forever for their bravery, their determination, and their ability to overcome evil. If you enjoyed this tale of terror and suspense, leave your comment below and share it with your friends. And if you want to explore other dark and terrifying tales, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. Remember, fear can be a powerful catalyst for courage and unity. And even in the darkest nights, hope can always be reborn.